By Stockton, 5, over to Bell and behind him, stolen by Malone. Game is over, 2-1, Utah wins.
It should not happen this way. It was too good a basketball game to end with this kind of fracas. I do not believe in this. I know exactly how it started.
I kid you not, guys. Karl Malone once tried to fight an entire team. Just watch the video until the end and you'll see what I'm talking about. The Mailman, otherwise known as Karl Malone. He's still regarded as one of the best players in Utah Jazz history and was known for competing against the best during his time in the league. Despite being a relatively calm man out on the court, he did end up getting into a few altercations and fights throughout his long career. In today's video, we're going over the top 5 fights that he was involved in, including one time when he was ready to fight an entire team. So stick around until the end of the video to find out which team it was he tried fighting. Kicking off our list, Karl Malone and the Utah Jazz were going up against the physical Detroit Pistons in this particular game. Isaiah Thomas was driving to the basket and jumped up for a layup before being met by the elbow of Malone, knocking him to the ground hard. While the play was likely an accident, Thomas was lying on the ground as a bloody mess, while referees called for medical assistance for the injured player. That was when a player on the Pistons bench decided to sprint onto the court and rush Malone as he was standing still to try to defend his point guard. He was caught pretty early on and was dragged down the tunnel and into the locker room, but the animosity in the arena started from that point. Even the Detroit head coach ran onto the floor and was arguing with the official over it. Thomas eventually was taken off the floor and went to the hospital to receive around 40 stitches for his injury. Meanwhile, the game continued, and Bill Laimbeer took it upon himself to get revenge for Thomas. Malone thought he was wide open for a layup when he was met from behind by the forearm of Laimbeer. Bill was taken off the floor pretty quickly, and it was obvious that the hit was intentional, given the events that transpired earlier. Laimbeer wasn't even upset though, but instead he was yelling and smiling while high-fiving people on his way out. I could imagine Malone wasn't too happy himself, but then again, he did give Thomas 40 stitches on his face and cause a bench player to sprint onto the court in an effort to fight him, so I guess everything was even, right? Here at number 4, we have more of a confrontation than a true fist fight. However, it was intense enough to get on this list, especially because it was the time Malone went face-to-face with Shaquille O'Neal during a game. In a matchup with the Los Angeles Lakers and the Jazz, Shaq fouled Malone incredibly hard on the way up for a layup. So hard, in fact, that it actually knocked Malone flat on his back, with Shaq towering over him. Malone slowly and calmly stood back up and got right in the face of Shaq as the two began exchanging words to one another and giving a warning of what was to come. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed because they were each charged with a technical foul for the altercation, and Malone lined up to shoot his 2 free throws from the previous foul that started the whole fight. Even though Malone is one big dude, I don't know if I would have ever tried my luck against the tower that was the Big Diesel himself. Malone is a calm enough individual though, and even though the two got into a verbal fight, they each restrained from throwing a punch or extra shove after the play was already dead. This next fight did end up getting a little more physical than the last one though, which is why it lands at number 3. The Utah Jazz were playing the Chicago Bulls, and Dennis Rodman was fighting on the boards as he usually did in a game. This was during his Chicago days with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen as well. Rodman and Karl Malone were going at it over a missed shot. They each attempted to grab the ball, but got themselves tangled up trying to do so. When they both tried to break off one another, they ended up knocking each other to the ground pretty hard. The refs instantly blew the whistles at both of them, and Malone sprung up angrily while Rodman was pleading his case to the officials. After some deliberation, they decided that there wasn't enough to eject either player, so there were just a few common fouls handed out. Rodman picked up his 5th foul for the act, though it wasn't enough to get him out of the game just yet, and he made sure to let Malone and Utah know that. He blew a kiss towards them while walking back down the court and just laughed. But that was just how Rodman was during his time in the league, and boy did he irritate the hell out of Karl Malone. Outside of this specific altercation, Rodman and Malone were tangled up numerous times in multiple other games. They even fought while Rodman was on the Los Angeles Lakers towards the back end of his career. So yeah, the hatred towards one another was pretty obvious. It seemed like every time these two guys stepped on the floor at the same time, there was bound to be some type of fight or at least a verbal altercation. There was another time when Rodman and Malone fell onto the floor together after they each got tangled up going for a rebound. They tried to get back up but fell on one another, then did it one more time for good measure. When they did get up, they argued a little more, and Malone even hit Rodman with a little elbow while pleading to the official. In normal Rodman fashion, though, he just laughed and kept on going. That was the complete opposite of what happened in this upcoming fight, so stick around until the end of the video to find out what happened there. Moving into a pretty serious verbal fight between Brian Grant and the Mailman at number 2. Grant was securing rebound after rebound in this particular game between the Jazz and the Portland Trailblazers. One time, he came down with the board and held onto it to make sure everybody cleared out and he could hand it to one of his guards. Malone took a swipe or two at the basketball but was unsuccessful in stealing it. Right after he was running back on defense, Grant faked a pass to the back of Malone before handing it to a point guard. The referee behind him saw the fake and instantly called a technical foul on him. I guess their coach Mike Dunleavy was already on the verge of a breakdown because he absolutely lost his mind after that call. He ran out onto the floor screaming and yelling at the ref while having to be held back by numerous people. Meanwhile, Grant and Malone walked over to one another and stood just inches away from each other's face. They were arguing and exchanging some words to one another for quite a while as Dunleavy went berserk. The talk between them was so intense that it seemed like a punch was bound to be thrown at any given moment. That was when officials finally ran over to separate them before they made matters worse than they already were. However, Grant and Malone continued to argue for a few more minutes despite being dragged apart. When they showed the replay of the two men arguing, you could see Grant leaning into Malone almost as if he was gearing up for a headbutt, though he never actually attempted one. Either way, the Jazz ended up running away with that game, but remained in a 3-2 hole in the series. I'm sure the fight between these two guys got things a little more intense the rest of the way. Heading into number 1, we have the time Karl Malone almost fought an entire team. The Jazz were up against the Golden State Warriors, and they held a 3-point lead with just seconds left on the clock. Golden State had the basketball, but one player lost the handle, sending the ball right into the hands of Malone, who ran to center court and looked to hold the ball until time ran out. However, he was fouled when he stopped to turn around, likely a frustration foul given how the game now was essentially over. When he stopped, he locked arms with a Warriors player who intentionally fouled him to save the game. Malone gave him a shove that was eventually returned before firing the ball at his chest. The other Warriors player took the ball and launched it at the back of Malone while he was walking away. Now, this made almost every single player on the court turn around and ram into one another in a massive pile-up towards the sidelines. For a good few minutes, it looked like everybody was shoving everybody, and that nobody was in the clear once they stepped inside that group of guys. Even coaches were getting themselves tangled up with other players because there were so many shoves being thrown. To make everything even crazier, there happened to be a fan who ran onto the court and into the pile too during all that. Nobody even realized that until the fan was shown being escorted through the tunnel and away from the floor when everything was finally starting to settle down a little bit. This fight had the potential to be a whole lot worse had a few things gone differently in the middle of that pile. Malone actually was vanishing throughout the pile once he rushed back towards the player who hit him with a basketball. The cameras couldn't spot him for a minute or so before he finally emerged. It was a pretty bad way to end a basketball game, and it happened in Game 2 of the 1987 NBA playoffs, just to make it all worse. I can imagine that the former NBA commissioner wasn't too happy about that ending whatsoever. Utah still ended up taking a 2-0 lead in the series despite the fight, and the game was in turn just ended at the time of the fight. There may have been a second or so left on the clock, but the referees decided to just get everybody into the tunnels and off the floor. That just about does it for this video on the top 5 fights of Karl Malone's terrific career in the NBA. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like down below and hit that subscribe button because it helps our channel out a ton. Also, remember to smash that bell icon so that you never miss another video because we've got some great stuff planned that you won't want to miss.